based in Brookfield, Wisconsin. Welcome to the latest episode of Inside Connect and Simplify. I'm Roger, Human Capital Management Consultant with the Benefit Companies. And again, today joined by Kathy, Vice President of the Benefit Companies. We're going to talk a little bit more about payroll. And today, it's going to be about some of the landmines that folks need to be aware of as they're going through their search of finding a new vendor in the payroll space. So, payroll isn't just, producing a couple of checks every 2 weeks. There's a lot more to it than that. There's tax notices and reporting and moving money and multiple look at it. You can go on all day. But what we're going to start with is really understanding or making sure that your payroll vendor understands the area you're in, that you're working in and your people live in, because there's a lot of complexity there. So Kathy's going to start with understanding the area that you're in.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to everybody. Payroll landmines is an important topic because I think as businesses are searching for a payroll partner, I'm going to call it, you really want to look for people that understand payroll and also understand your business and can help look out for areas that could be a potential problem. I think everyone has experienced if payday rolls around, nobody really thinks about payday until payday rolls around and all of a sudden you don't get paid or the employees don't get paid. And that's terrifying. It becomes the number one most important thing on that day if employees aren't paid to make sure we get everybody paid. So we work very hard at trying to avoid the pitfalls or the landmines that could cause a disruption in a paycheck. And, it really erodes, I think, to a certain extent, the trust between employees and their employer if the employer can't get that piece right. So I think we all take it for granted when it works, but when it doesn't work, the ramifications are huge. So the first thing that there's sort of three areas in the payroll landmine discussion that I want to touch on. And the first one you teed up beautifully, Roger, which is make sure you're hiring somebody who really understands your local area where you're doing business. What's really interesting right now in the landscape of payroll across the country is that every state is just a little bit different. So you might have a company here in the state of Wisconsin, but you might hire a salesperson or a consultant that lives and works in another state. We actually just onboarded a new client and they have a complexity because they actually do work in other states. They repair rail track and they'll go on these stints for 2 or 3 weeks to repair track in different parts of the country. And depending on what state they're in, they may or may not have to pay taxes because those employees actually become employees of that state. So just levels of complexity all over the place. So you want to make sure that you're hiring a payroll provider or partner that really understands all the different states and the rules. Local taxes is another trend that we're seeing across the country. It's fascinating to me because what we're seeing is the advent of counties, municipalities, even cities and villages adding taxes to payroll to fund local projects. So you need to be familiar with where your employees not only work, but where they live, down into what county are they in, what city are they in, what municipality are they in, and are there any rules around having to tax those employees for things like the local school district or family paid leave in certain parts of a state or within states within the country. So those are just some really interesting trends that we're seeing. We're also seeing state and local tax, what I'm going to call add-ons. Some states, for example, have state-specific taxes like a transit tax that get added to everyone, not just people that live maybe in an urban area, but it may include actually rural areas and taxation of those individuals to help pay for that urban area transit. We're also seeing the government, and again, going state by state, adding in paid family leave for employees, and that's getting taxed at a payroll level. But again, not in every state and not necessarily every community. And then we also see, and this is one that I think is pretty interesting, we see actually requirements in some states and localities for employers to pay their employees within a certain amount of time after separation of employment. So it doesn't matter if somebody's fired or if they just quit and leave, but the requirement to pay someone within 24 to 48 hours after they walk out the door. So if employers listening to this, imagine you are in the middle of a pay period and somebody leaves, and now you have to quick within 1 day gather up all their hours and get a paycheck out to them. Pretty crazy stuff. So really important that your partner understands where you are doing business and what rules apply.
And as you were going through that laundry list, I'm thinking of pandemic changes that we've seen in the last few years. And so
exactly
the paid family leave part was one, correct? And then this one with terminations. So we have all these people leaving jobs,
right,
where they might not have experienced that before. Now all of a sudden you've got them leaving nonstop. Wow. Yeah. So that one's a new one for me. I wasn't familiar with that one. And I could see how, again, you got to call somebody up and I got to cut a check today.
Right. Yeah. You bring up, the whole pandemic and the COVID leave. That was, I think, our first, we'd been seeing that states and local governments were figuring out that payroll was a great avenue to be able to tax people because obviously people get paid. And this is an effective way to do it. But with the COVID paid leaves that the government was providing, which was very important, also was put through the payroll system. So that added a level of complexity on top of an already crazy uncertain time. Now, I will say the COVID leave aspect is different than what we're seeing with paid family leave. So I just make that distinction because even though that
I'm not a payroll guy.
Right, no, I know.
Yeah.
Even though COVID is sunsetted, I think we're going to see this continue.
Okay. So that kind of leads into the next one, though, because if we talk about folks leaving and you have to pay them within 24 hours, it's not just calling up and saying, hey, I need a check, but you got to move money too, which is outside of your normal routine. And funding's the next one on your list of things to talk about. So funding is, again, handled differently by payroll bureaus. Talk about that.
Yeah, funding is one of those things that I'm glad we're having this conversation because, again, if you're a business and you're wanting to look for a payroll partner that makes sense for you, you want to understand the funding piece. And what do we mean by funding? Funding is the movement of the money. So you're going to want to look for a payroll partner that uses your money to pay your people. Generally speaking, large national payroll bureaus are going to have a smaller window of time for you to fund your payroll. But what in essence they're doing is using other companies' money to pay your people and using your money to pay somebody else. So what has to happen in funding is you have to take, let's say your payday is on Friday. You have to back up days prior to that and start moving your money earlier in the week in order to get it through the banking system so that it can arrive in your employees' bank accounts by 12:01 a.m. on Friday. And typically to move money through the banking system, you need between 48 and 72 hours to do that. So it's important to just understand where in that payroll week, if payday is on Friday, when your money starts to move. If your money isn't moving until Thursday and your people are expecting a paycheck at 12:01 a.m. on Friday morning, chances are it's somebody else's money paying your people. And the problem that you run into, and this has happened before, is there are companies out there, third-party administrators, that are responsible for moving the money in those scenarios, in those short windows. And sometimes, sadly, they have businesses that end up with non-sufficient funds, NSF. And it then trickles through. So if a payroll bureau isn't using your money, but instead somebody else's, but for whatever reason, they actually don't have the money at the end of the day, it can start this house of cards effect. And we've seen that happen. I actually got a call from a company here in Wisconsin that was out $170,000 in payroll, and they had the money in their account, but because their window for funding was so small, it was really somebody else's, was this third-party administrator was moving this money around, and they had an NSF issue, and their employees ended up not getting paid. So they had to fund an additional $170,000 to get their employees paid, and then try to fight with this third-party administrator to get their money back. So the best way to do it is to hire a payroll partner that's going to use your money and have a nice window. I've actually talked to a business recently, too, who told me that she gets to about 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon for a payday on Friday, and she's sweating it because she's watching to see if the money is getting pulled from her account. And she said, one of these days, I swear, it's not going to come out and our employees are not going to get paid. So she was actually really relieved to work with us because we started that process earlier in the week. So she was assured that payroll was going to happen on Friday.
So again, just setting the expectation ahead of time, saying, hey, look, this is our process, and it takes 3 or 4 days. You're going to plan on that.
Correct.
And you're going to know that by the time you get to Thursday, you don't have to sit there and sweat.
Correct.
So it's going to be ready for it. Yeah, okay. And I remember, I don't remember the name of the company. Was it Cachet? Does that sound right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a year or two ago where they were the third-party vendor who was the House of Cards. And if you're not familiar with that, look that one up. Google Cachet and see that mess that they created for all their clients and the clients that were scrambling to get their people paid. What a story that was and what a mess they created. All right, so we talked about understanding the area. We talked about funding and moving money. And we always come back to service because service is something that we think we do to a different level. But talk about service in this aspect.
Yeah, I think this is the third big category under payroll landmines because sometimes, and how many times have we heard the old cliche, you get what you pay for, right? And sometimes I think businesses make decisions when they pick a payroll partner to go with the cheapest one out there. But you pay for that decision in one way or another, and usually it's around service. And I haven't met a business yet, no matter what they do, whether they're in manufacturing or non-for-profit or education or retail, and no matter what size, ends up with some level of complication where they need to talk to somebody. Either they enter something into the payroll system wrong, or they realize they paid somebody incorrectly and they need to fix it, or there's certain levels of complication either due to garnishments or pay agreements where you need some expertise and you need some help. And at that moment in time, you want to be able to get on the phone or send an email and get a response. And get a response from somebody who knows, who understands, who understands payroll, understands what you're probably trying to accomplish. And if they don't, understands to ask you all kinds of questions until they do know. And that way they can guide you appropriately. I think it's hard on businesses when you've got an issue and now you're a ticket or you're a number and you've got to sit on hold. And then when you finally do get a hold of somebody, they don't have the expertise. They haven't been doing it very long. They don't really understand what you're trying to do or accomplish or what your question even is. And now what do you do? So, and it's tough. Payroll can get complicated and it can get ugly quick. So you want to make sure that you've got a partner that's got your back so you don't get this wrong.
So what we like to term our experts here, we call them subject matter experts for a reason. So not only do we have the service model that gets you the answers you want sooner, but you have somebody who's actually an expert. I think one of the as you were talking about this, one of the things that jumped out to me was one thing I hate is I have to make a phone call or I get on a chat, explain my situation, go through all of that. And then they tell me, okay, I have to move you to somebody else. And then you start over again. And we've kind of eliminated that by the way we take care of things.
Definitely.
But that drives me crazy. And I have to do it in some of the things I do here, even, with some of the carriers I have to work with. So, yeah, a big deal. And a landmine you do want to try to avoid. Understood. All right. Anything else that jumps into mind here regarding landmines, or is that what you wanted to cover today?
Yeah, I think these are the big ones. I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about real specific stuff, but I think for today, these are the big things you should look out for.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. So we're going to come back and we're going to do more on payroll. Today was landmines. The next one's going to be about the marketplace. We're going to just talk about who's out there and who's playing in the space. So that's what we're going to look at next. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you as always.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside Connect and Simplify. Be well. Find our podcast, Inside Connect and Simplify, in all of the following places, so you can listen anytime, anywhere. Go to connectandsimplify.com/podcast to find our entire library of podcasts. Also find us on Alexa, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, Listen Notes, Google Podcasts, Pandora, and Podbean. Thanks for listening.